Today I'm going to share with you some of the world's gems for high-class, low-tax living. And I'm going to talk about one specifically that offers some of the flavor, some of the development, some of the business savvy of the country you may be used to, but at a much lower price tag. So we recently got some feedback from someone that said the thing that keeps confusing me is the blanket statements about how you pay less tax offshore than in the US. Aside from the healthcare system, you'd be hard-pressed to find lower tax rates in most places with a similar market to the US. I don't know anyone who's ever paid a 50% tax bill in the US outside of New York and California. Now, if it's your first time here, my name is Andrew Henderson. I'm not only the one who says I pay less tax overseas, I'm also the founder of a boutique consultancy called Nomad Capitalist, where we help legally 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors reduce their taxes overseas, protect and diversify their assets overseas, and expand their freedom and their options with things like second passports. I'm also the host of the biggest and best offshore conference called Nomad Capitalist Live. And I wanted to comment on this statement because one of the things that I find fascinating when we talk about our 5 magic words, go where you're treated best, is that people try and read into that like, I live in the US, I want to go where I'm treated best, I'm going to go to Canada, or I'm going to go to the UK, or I'm going to go to the other countries that I've heard about. There was an interesting meme on social media saying, here's the international community that you always hear politicians talking about. And it was basically a map of the US and Canada and Western Europe and Australia, New Zealand, and I think Japan. And the rest of the world was just completely not filled in because they're not really part of this international community. And so I think the same thing applies to when people want to move overseas. This gentleman is saying, I don't understand how you pay less tax outside the United States than inside the United States. And I have talked about how I reduced my tax rate from 43% all in to 1% all in, thereabouts. And the reason is I don't go to countries that have similar high taxes to the United States, right? If we're comparing the United States to France, then maybe the United States wins. People might like the culture of France. They might think they're getting more money for getting more value from their tax dollars. Others would say, hey, the US wins, you pay less in tax. You know, it's more entrepreneurial. You can decide between those two. But yes, obviously you're not saving tax by moving to France. You're maybe not going to save tax in most cases moving to Germany or moving to Spain. But what you do have, first of all, is a lot of those high tax countries in Europe starting to roll out tax incentives. Spain has a pretty bad one. Portugal has one. You've got a number of non-dom and other kind of tax incentive countries, countries with lump sum taxes like Italy and Spain and Greece. You've got a whole different number of ways you can legally reduce your taxes if you are a 7- or 8-figure earner in Western European countries to a single-digit tax rate. Not to zero unless you go to Monaco or unless you go all the way to the east in a country like Georgia. But in Western Europe, you can reduce your taxes. So if I'm an American and I want to move to Switzerland, for example, and I make $5 million a year, my tax rate is going to be substantially less. Depending on how I structure myself. Certainly if I were to give up my US citizenship to live in Switzerland, my taxes are going to be substantially less. But certainly I know a lot of people paying those kinds of tax rates. We always hear about, Jeff Bezos and this guy paid 3%, this guy paid 1%. Most people that we're working with are coming to us because they want freedom, because they want a better lifestyle, but also because they're paying high taxes. They're not getting the benefit of these 3% rates that the media keeps saying the billionaire class is paying. They're paying a lot, even outside of California, even outside of New York. And so if you want to reduce those tax rates, then you have to stop seeking out something that's very similar. And I've said, if you want something that is similar enough, but still tax advantaged, go to one of the countries in Europe that has a tax incentive program. Go to Italy, go to Switzerland, go to Portugal, go to Malta, go to Cyprus, go to Ireland, go to the UK, go to any of those countries, even Greece, that have those incentive programs. Obviously, there are plenty of other places in the world that are developed, and we'll talk about some of those in a moment. But let me go through a couple of the points that he makes here. Number one, he talks about healthcare. U.S. healthcare obviously is the most expensive in the world. We did a report about 1.5 years ago saying that U.S. healthcare, according to studies by the medical industry, was the 37th highest quality in the world. So you pay number one, you get 37. The kind of false dichotomy that people like this often put out is, it's better than in Yemen. But that's not the dichotomy. That's not the choice that I have. The choice is I can go to Malaysia, I can go to Dubai, I can go to Istanbul, I can go to Panama City, I can go to Mexico City, I can go to Prague, I can go to London, I can go to all number of different places, get better quality care for a fraction of the price. So you don't need to be in the U.S., as he says, for healthcare. The other question that he brings up is, why do I need to live in a similar market? So if you're thinking, okay, he's mentioning, Malta and Cyprus and Portugal. These are all very small countries. Switzerland, obviously, very developed. Italy's a big market, obviously not as developed, not as wealthy as the U.S. But for me, I learned at 21 years old that as long as I had a phone, I could run my business. If you have a virtual business, if you have investments that you can make from anywhere, if you've got a business that you can run with a management team in place somewhere else, why do you need to be in a developed country? When my family talked about moving to New Zealand in the mid-1990s, the idea was, let's sell everything, let's move there and start a new life. That's not really how it works today. How it works today is, sure, let's live in New Zealand. And as a burgeoning entrepreneur, when I was like 12 or 13 years old and my parents were saying this, I'm like, well, no, how am I? Like, I'm going to have 4 million people to sell to. And I didn't understand, as kind of an early user of the internet at that point, that the internet would revolutionize how we sell things to people, and that right now I would be selling to people from 36 different countries and serving them from wherever it is that I live, and that people would by and large accept that. And so in the same way that you've historically had Egyptians that moved to Dubai, and they're both Arabic speaking to some extent, and they can sell stuff to people back in Egypt, and they can kind of arbitrage between those two. You now have the opportunity to say, hey, I'm an American, I'm a Canadian, I'm a whatever. I'm going to move to another country. I'll say I'm going to live in the UAE, I'm going to live in Dubai, and I can sell stuff through my e-commerce store, through my consulting firm that operates the same way we did during the pandemic, through Zoom, through Google Meets, whatever. I'm going to sell my stuff there. So why do I need to be in a similar market? I almost would say I want to live in a smaller country, which is what I've been saying for years, where they're going to give me a better tax rate. They're going to give me more incentives to invest. They're going to be glad that I'm there. Maybe they're going to give me citizenship faster. Maybe the lifestyle is better. Maybe they're less likely to take away my freedoms because it's a small country. And so they have to be nimble. So I like the idea of living in a smaller market where the country has to be competitive and then selling into bigger markets. And you can do that either without any tax consequences or in some cases very minimal tax consequences. So why do I need to live in the United States and pay US taxes and deal with all the chaos going on in the United States? And just for me, what wasn't a good entrepreneurial fit earlier in my life, I just didn't feel like it was my place. Why do I have to deal with that when I can just sell to Americans from somewhere else? So quite frankly, where you're living, where the similar market to the US is irrelevant, because you can continue to do business from anywhere in the world. There may be some proper tax structuring, especially if you're selling things like physical products. They are looking at the global minimum tax, which has been slow to roll out. I'm not convinced it's going to be entirely rolled out, and it's not even going to apply to most of our businesses initially. So I think that you don't need to be in a market that is similar to yours. You want to be in a place that offers you a good quality of life, more freedom, and a good financial situation, and then sell to somewhere else where there's good business opportunities. And I think you can do that now more than ever. Now, how do I pay more tax overseas? Well, there's a couple different ways you can go about it. Number one is you can follow my trifecta method, which for me is a lifestyle approach. I like to get in a couple months every year in Asia. I like to get in a couple months in various parts of Europe. Could be Western Europe, could be Eastern Europe. Obviously, it's a broad continent, as is Asia. And to a lesser extent, I like to get in time in Latin America. If I had to pick two, I would choose Europe and Asia and just move between the two. But hey, it's nice to go to my home in Colombia. We're hosting Nomad Capitalist live in Mexico City. It's nice to go and have the food, have the vibrant culture. I like to get a taste of all of that. Now, I also have my taxes structured in a place where I pay taxes personally in a place where I really have very little tax liability because I don't trigger the tax requirements in any other country. Now, did I set that up specifically to pay less taxes? It certainly is a nice benefit, and I'm not going to deny that. I would not want to live for 6 months in Colombia. And by the way, even if I did want to live there, yeah, you know what? If millions of dollars are at stake, I think people do definitely change their philosophy. So whether you're choosing my trifecta method because you want to lower your taxes and you say, okay, well, here's a country where, unlike a Canada or Australia, they use a strict days test, and there are a number of emerging countries like this. Listen, you spend 183 days, you pay. If you don't, you don't. That's their rule. One day they'll change it, and you make a determination. Am I willing to follow the new rules or not? But for right now, I go to a country like Colombia, I buy a ton of stuff, I pay a bunch of money in sales tax and put money into the economy, buy property, promote the country, and don't pay income tax, don't pay wealth tax there. And so you can have the trifecta approach where you're living in a number of different places. And for me, by the way, it allows me to look at business opportunities. I spend time in Eastern Europe. We have employees in Eastern Europe. The tax that we do pay is a lot of money in payroll taxes every year. We have a global team, now over 50. A few of those are kind of around the world, but most of them are under our own roof, and we pay payroll tax, and so we're contributing to the economy in that way, more than a lot of companies that are just hiring, 1 or 2 freelancers. And so for me to be in that part of the world allows me to expand my business. We have kind of started the process of expanding business into Latin America. And so being in Latin America some of the time allows you to kind of facilitate that. So I think, living the trifecta lifestyle helps you grow your business. I wouldn't want to run a business that just sells to the U.S. To me, that's not diversified enough. We love working with folks from the U.S., but it's also nice to expand into Europe. It's also nice to have people from the Spanish-speaking world. We've had people from Asia. And so by living in different places, I get to grow the business. Whether the countries are developed enough for this commenter, I don't know, but it's worked for us, and we've had great success in understanding more of those cultures and diversifying our business just away from the one culture that 12 or 13 years ago I was the most familiar with. And so the trifecta is one way to improve your business opportunities, potentially reduce your tax, and also increase your lifestyle, which is, for me, a big reason. I like to get a little bit of sampling of everything. The other thing is, if you just want to live in one place every year, how do you find a developed place to live? Well, some of the countries I mentioned, Ireland, the UK, Malta, and Cyprus, all have kind of similar tax programs where you more or less pay on the money that you live on, and you have more tax flexibility beyond that. And so you can structure your companies internationally. As a foreigner, go there and take advantage of some serious tax benefits. I don't think anyone's going to deny that the UK is not a developed market. It is certainly a smaller consumer market than the US, but there's plenty of business to be had in the UK. Ireland, Malta, Cyprus, obviously smaller, but you're still within the European Union. You're still within that European market. And you've got a lot of opportunities there that you can just move between. I mean, how many people decided during the pandemic to move to kind of a distant suburb, but they still have to come into the city occasionally now to do business, or they have to go and check on the factory that's in the city, or whatever, right? Now they live further out because they wanted to move further out for more space during the pandemic. Is that really that much different than saying, hey, once a month I have to fly from Malta to some headquarters in Frankfurt, for example, or in some bigger developed market that's within Europe? I don't necessarily think so. Portugal, another small market, they have their NHR tax incentive program. That's another great program. And you can live in a smaller European country. You're next to a bigger one, Spain, not as wealthy certainly as the United States, but it's a big consumer market. Next to that is France. Next to that is Germany. 3 big consumer markets, all kind of right there at your doorstep. You're living in tax-friendly Portugal because, again, Portugal has to actually put out some value compared to Spain because they're a much smaller country. They don't have the tourist arrivals necessarily. They don't have all the investment coming. They don't have the brand name. They're building the brand name. They've done very well with that by offering tax incentives, by operating an open door policy, basically. Switzerland, of course. Is anyone going to suggest that Switzerland's not a developed market? They've got a very friendly tax program. Depending on where in Switzerland you live, you might pay 3, 4, 5% on a multi-million-dollar annual income. Yes, it's going to be more complicated than living other places. Yes, they have a wealth tax, which could be infinitesimal in some of the cantons. But so there's some complication with Switzerland. But if your goal is you want a developed market and you're not totally trying to reduce your tax to zero, Switzerland, that's about as developed as it gets. I mean, you have a much higher percentage of Swiss residents who are millionaires than Americans. So if you want a great market to sell to me, that's interesting. And again, you're at the doorstep of all of Europe. I mean, you're at the doorstep of certainly Germanic and French-speaking countries and just all of Europe in general, very centrally located. How is that really any different than saying, you know what, I want to live in Kansas City and I've got business all over the United States, or I want to live in Calgary and I've got business all over Canada. Monaco, obviously, tax-free. You can do that living in Europe. Obviously, a very small consumer economy, tens of thousands of people, but you're at the doorstep of other countries. Dubai, tax-free, not in Europe, but is anyone going to argue that Dubai isn't a developed market? You are at the doorstep of all kinds of emerging markets. We've helped a number of folks from Egypt, for example. You're at the market, you have Middle East, North Africa, all these different areas around there where there's a lot of growth. That could be a good place to be if you want a developed market. It is, I mean, go to Dubai, go to Abu Dhabi, walk around. The sidewalks are much more clean. They don't have holes in them. The roads are pothole free as opposed to many places in the US and the Western world. And then same with Singapore. Again, not in Europe, but very developed. Small consumer economy, but what's at its doorstep? Indonesia, one of the hidden gems that no one talks about, no one really thinks about in the West. One of the largest countries in the world that is emerging. Right? You've got Malaysia, more developed emerging country to its north. You've got Southeast Asia, where you literally have a tiny circle in Southeast Asia that encompasses part of China, and you have more people inside that circle than outside of the circle in the entire world. One little circle in Asia, you have more population than outside of it. You want developed, you want big consumer markets? How about being in Singapore and being the hub for all those markets? You have people leaving Hong Kong now, coming to Singapore. You're telling me that's not developed? They've got a territorial tax system. And so while they flirted with some level of increased taxation, it's still going to be a lot tax friendlier than the United States. And so you've got a number of places where if you're looking for the gems that have high class of living, you're going to live well in Switzerland, in Ireland, in the UK, in Singapore, in Monaco, in Dubai. This is not the slumming lifestyle, I mean, unless you want to, I guess. But you're going to have high class and low tax. And you're at the doorstep, if not in, very developed markets. Maybe it's not the US, and if you still want to sell to the US and North America, you can from there. But you can move to these countries, you can dramatically reduce your taxes, even as an American. There is going to be some planning, for sure, in these kinds of countries. It's going to be a little bit harder than just moving to Dubai, right? And if you're an American, that adds an extra complication. But you can, even as an American, dramatically reduce your taxes, live in these places, have a better quality of life. In many of these countries, work towards citizenship, including in Malta, which has a citizenship program, and Cyprus, which used to. Without paying, you can work towards citizenship in those countries and get what other people are paying for to move faster. Other countries like Ireland, Portugal have citizenship options. You can work towards that. You can diversify. You can see new business opportunities. Quite frankly, the idea that you wouldn't move out of a high-tax country to go to these places just doesn't make sense.